Hello everyone, welcome to Transvirtual's May webinar. Can see we've got a lot of people have joined already, which is great. Thanks for coming along today. As everyone's aware, today we'll be taking you through some internal costings in Transvirtual, essentially help you keep some estimated costs tracked in the system, ensuring that when you review any consignment, you can get a feel for the revenue made off that, as well as taking into account the cost to the business and ensuring that any runs you do are assessed for profitability. Today's session will be a bit of a focus on utilising rate cards, so a method where you can set up rate cards to track costs from both a delivery, pickup and line haul perspective. We'll also touch on an alternative method for tracking line haul costs, which gives you a little bit more accuracy, but it does require a little bit more setup and a few more configurations. We'll touch towards that on the end of the session, but if it is something that's interested for you, you guys would like to learn more, we definitely can work with our support team there and arrange some time for you to go through and look at that configuration. So just quickly, today we'll be jumping straight into the system, going through. We do have a Q&A. Please feel free to pop questions in the Q&A. We may not be able to cover them off straight away. However, any questions that go in, we will reply back to you, and we'll include any questions answered as part of our feedback summary. We'll send an email through with links to the recording, which goes up on YouTube. We'll make sure that everyone can see the answer to that, so you're across everything. So we're just going to jump into the system now. You can see here this nice new shiny Transvirtual. For anyone who may be seeing an older grey screen or a slightly different layout, this is the most recent update for Transvirtual. You can adjust your view to see this through the global settings. Have a look through our knowledge base. There's a navigation update 2022, so it has been around for a while, but we do still have a lot of customers utilising the older layout. That won't affect anything we go through today, purely just a nicer look and feel. We mention every time because we do just like to see everyone getting over to the latest view, making it nice and easy on the eyes. So first thing we want to look at is how we can actually enable these specific costing rate cards in the system. And to do that, you can go through your configuration into your global setup. And then on the right-hand side here, under General, we go down beyond Settings, and we'll find our Finance tab here. So at the very bottom of the Finance tab, we've got the option to add in rate cards for both pickups and deliveries, as well as our line haul. So you can see that I've already nominated some of these rate cards. We'll jump into that configuration. I'll talk through it a little bit as well. The other thing you can do as well is nominate a daily operational cost. So we call this the cost of turning the lights on. Basically, you have a minimum cost to run each day. You can set that figure and make sure that's applied across all your consignments for a given day. This effectively will be assigned using against each consignment by taking into account the amount of cubic that consignment has. So it's distributed proportionately across your consignments, but effectively you can just put a minimum operating cost as well there. So coming back up, we're going to go into our Finance tab here, and we're going to start to look at our rate cards. Now, when you create these rate cards for internal costing, you could actually set them against your customer transport rate cards as well. There's nothing to stop you there, but we suggest putting it against your supplier transport rates or your agent rate cards, which we'd call. Pretty much because these are internal costs, these are costs to you, whereas your customer transport rates, you want to leave as revenue coming to you. So I've already set up two different ones. So depending on your preference, you may want to set up 3 individual rate cards, a delivery, a pickup and a line haul. Or you may find that your delivery and pickup costs overlap and there's no need to split them out. You can simply recycle that rate card. Coming into my delivery cost here, first thing I want to do is just make sure that this is looking at the correct zone listing. So I'm going to select my pricing zones there. And then we can also just do the same thing for our line haul costs here. Now, the big thing about using these is that you want to make sure you're considering your routes from looking at from a sender and a receiver standpoint as well. So even though our line haul costs may be attributed for distances between our head ports or our depots, We do need to make sure we're taking into account those routes that go, say, from Sydney to Perth. We want to make sure we're accounting for that combination. We can't literally just say whenever we're sending a line haul route between those two depots, we need to align it to our typical pricing, and we'll go into that in a little minute. So let's go through. I'm just going to flick that on again. Perfect. We're looking at my pricing zones here. I'm going to go just jump straight into our rate card. Now, talking through my rate card setup, anyone who's used to setting up rate cards in Transvirtual already would be familiar with the typical setup where you utilize your service level, you then talk about your freight items, and then you have your routes. And for each of those combinations, you then have a series of flat rates, quantity rates, weight rates, distances, etc. Now, depending on your setup, when we talk about delivery or pickup costs, your service levels may have no difference in terms of the costing. So what you could do is actually only have a single service level, and then below that service level have everything contained underneath. So effectively we just say, regardless of whether it's express, we could say we're going to treat it like a standard as well, custom, etc. Whatever we need to include, just lump it all into under one. This just means we minimize the amount of data entry we do, and we just treat it as the standard service level. When it comes to freight items, your costing may define how you need to assess this. So for example, if your internal costings just look at weights, so weight of the freight, you may not need to split out your freight items. Whereas if you're looking at creating costing based off quantities of items, you may need to split that out to make sure you're accounting for different costs between a pallet and a carton, for example. Next thing, we talk about our zones. So we're currently looking at, ignore the delivery, we're going to talk about pickup costs. So I'm going to build a rate card looking at my costings for pickups. Now, even though I'm only looking at the pickup component of this journey, the way Transvirtual's rate card works is it's looking at the sender and the receive zone. So I need to make sure I'm putting in every route where a pickup could be possible. So to start with, if I have a depot based in Sydney and I complete metro pickups, I need to make sure that I'm assigning a pickup rate for every combination, regardless of where it's ending up. If I'm doing a pickup for that scenario, I need to make sure I'm putting in a pickup rate here. So when I have something leaving Sydney, if it's going to Goulburn Regional, Illawarra, Melbourne, any of that, I want to make sure I'm accounting for my pickup rate here. Utilizing our copy functionality, it's really easy to copy across rates. So the first thing I might want to just do is set a quantity rate for this. So ignore the fact we're going to Goulburn now. I'm just leaving Sydney. We're talking about a pickup within Sydney. For every carton that I collect, it's going to cost me $10. What I can then do is say, well, that's logically the same for when it goes to Goulburn, to Illawarra, Melbourne, anywhere else. So I can just simply copy that across to the other regions as well. And I can even do this for multiple areas as well. So not only just leaving my Sydney depot, but metro as well, we can assign that rate. And from here, really easily, you can tweak it too. So for whatever reason, if it might cost you a little bit more for some reason, because you may need to do some special packaging for anything going to Perth, for example, you can adjust that from here as well, but we're going to keep it a blanket. Just quickly touching on how you can set up these costings. You can set up a flat rate per consignment for this. You can set up a quantity rate using your freight items, and you can also set up weight rates as well. What you can't do is set up distance rates, unfortunately, and it comes back to the logic that the system follows, where it's always looking at the sender and receiver addresses. What the system would do is if you popped in a distance rate here to use your costing, it unfortunately is going to take into account the whole trip. So from your sender address all the way through to your receiver address. So distance rates, time rates, not very efficient here and don't accurately reflect that delivery or pickup component. So we need to ignore them. You can set a minimum and maximum service level service charge against these though if you need to. So nice and easily, I can continually go through and add my additional areas. So if I do pickups from additional areas, I can add them in and continue to build out those rates. Now, simply put, I save that and then go back to my global configuration setup and assign that rate card. Now that will assign that component of the costing to my consignment whenever it hits one of those criteria. So my service levels obviously all covered. When it sees that particular freight item and that route, it knows to assign that pickup cost. Now, one small difference and one reason why you may want to split out your delivery cost card compared to your pickup cost card is going to be the fact that when you have deliveries, you can set a default from zone here. And what this lets you do is effectively set up one set of rates for each receiving region and say, regardless of where it's coming from, use these delivery costs. And so it's just an easier way to do it. Basically, if I want to go up and set up my delivery costs here, what I could do is set up my weight rates for each region, basically saying, when the receiving region is Goulburn, the delivery cost will be this. And if I turn on this default setting here, what this means is that regardless of the sending region, the system will always just use these rates to the receivers. So it's a quick way to do it and would be the one reason why you may look to split up your pickup and your delivery costs. Outside of there actually being differences in the costs or how you cost those internally between your pickups and your deliveries. So nice little simple one there. You've probably already realised these are estimated costs. So we're not able to get granular. We are just trying to give you an approximation so that you can create some costing. As we go through, I'll show you some key screens where you can start to track this, but ultimately it's meant to give you a feel for the profitability of a run, for a consignment, and make sure that you're starting to have a think about these, and you can easily identify situations where you may not be making enough profit and you may need to reassess this, be it a reprice or look at bringing on more freight somehow or be more efficient. Now, the next one we want to look at is our line haul. So just quickly, talking about line haul, travel in, taking freight in between our depots. This will still rely on our sender and receiver zone. So what I'm going to do is talk through the logic there, and we'll be repeating ourselves a little bit. But if we jump into our line haul card here, what we can do is, again, look at our service levels. Very similar, we can group our service levels together. So if standard, I want to include express, other service levels as part of that, we can. If we need to split it out to make sure that our line haul components are costing differently, if we've got an express service level, we can do so. And then obviously our freight items as well need to be taken into account. Now, just quickly with our freight items, because we're assuming this being loaded onto a vehicle, we do need to rely on weight rates here. We need to make sure that we're basically using weight rates for any line haul costing components. Later on, we'll go into a more detailed section where you can actually utilize an agent rate card to get a better estimate of costs for a line haul route. Ultimately here, though, the system's assuming that for every bit of freight you send, there's an associated cost tied to that weight of the items. You can't go anymore. So if you imagine I was to fill up a vehicle, a semi going across from Sydney to Perth, but I only filled the vehicle with half of the freight that it could fit, the system will be utilising the weight rates. It's got 50% of the weight capacity. That means that the costs reported to me are 50% lower than it actually costs, because say it cost me $2,000 to drive it across the state. However, the system's saying there's only $1,000 worth of weight assigned with that. Unfortunately, this method will show you that weight. So this way does undercut sometimes. It is one to keep an eye on to make sure that you are utilising your line haul as much as possible. You're filling up a vehicle as much as you can. Ultimately, though, this could cause some problems if you aren't utilising that space effectively. Ignoring that, though, very similar setup. We're essentially saying, for each service level, for each freight item, how we charge in. Typically, we'd say per weight. With your zones, I mentioned before, you just need to make sure that you're taking into account the fact that you're utilising the sender and receiver as your route. So effectively, if I'm taking something from regional Sydney or metropolitan Sydney through to metropolitan Perth, I have a line haul route there from Sydney to Perth. If I'm taking something in between Sydney to Sydney, so just metro areas, I don't have a line haul route. What I need to make sure is I'm not costing there, but I'm essentially telling the system that there is a cost associated with that route. The system doesn't know by default that there's line haul involved in any of these routes. It's basically looking at the sender and receiver and then I'm telling it where a cost applies. So there's a little bit of your logic needing to flow through here. So for example, if I have a sender based in Sydney, in the Sydney metropolitan area, what I want to do immediately is just remove the Sydney Metro receiver, because I know there's no line haul there. The same thing could apply for anyone based in New South Wales. No Illawarra, just down, there's no line haul. Same thing, I probably am not doing any line haul to Goulburn. I've actually got a vehicle that runs out there and does deliveries. I do daily runs. That's all good. So what I'm then left with is a line haul route. I know that we need to do line haul between Sydney and Melbourne Metro. If I've got anything going to Southeast Queensland or Northern New South Wales, I know I have a line haul route operating between there. Same thing for Perth and maybe for my regional areas as well. So just one to have a think about as you go through, and just make sure you check your logic there and everything makes sense. And then once you've trimmed down that list, you can go and set up your costings. And anyone just looking along, please ignore any pricing I put. Just quickly throwing in some numbers there, so don't worry too much about that. Perfect. So now we've set up our line haul costing. We've also got effectively our delivery and pickup costs. We can start to look at areas within Transvirtual where we can utilize this and start to report on it. The first and easiest place is through your consignment screen here. So I'm sure everyone is across it, but using this little book icon here, I can determine which columns I would like to be visible, have visible from my screen, and we can pull through reporting costs. So the first one you'll see here in my list is my customer price. So this is essentially what I'm charging my customer pre-tax. Next thing I can pull through is my consignment reportable costs combined. So this is taking into account both my line haul as well as my pickup and delivery costs. The system will also show me a consignment profit margin, so essentially showing me the percentage between those two values. If I wanted to, I could also then bring in just the operational costs, which we mentioned before. That's just the keeping the lights on costs. I could also then look at my run sheet cost, which is my pickup and delivery, and then also line haul too. So I can split that out and view all these from this screen here. So nice and simply, I can get a summary. And for anyone who's used to exporting data out of this screen, you can simply export that to Excel and crunch some numbers really simply. So a really easy way just to report on through the system for those little areas. Now, if I need to go back and look at these costs, you just need to remember that once you've set these cards up, you do need to tell the system to reprice the consignment so it can take into account those deliveries. So just make sure you're running your pricing over your consignments whenever you make changes to rate cards. So that's the latest figures. To do that, select all consignments from your screen here. So any in view, you can select this little hamburger icon there and then select reprice your consignments. This will just make sure that any changes you've made to rate cards apply, and the system will send you an email through just confirming when that process is run, because it will run in the background. Quick little hint, once you run a repricing process, please do wait for that email to turn up in your inbox, because effectively if I go to and load another set of consignments to try to run the repricing, it's going to stop that first process. So just make sure you're only running them one at a time, let it run and receive that email to confirm you can go and do your next round of repricing. So in terms of reporting within Transvirtual, you do have your PDF and Excel reports available to you. And if I search for profit, you'll see here we can start to look at things like our profit and loss by customer and freight profile, as well as by freight type as well. So once you've started to build in your internal costings, you can start to leverage these reports just to keep track, and be it a weekly or a monthly report you run, you can just make sure that any customers you're actually making profit off, have you got any profitable zones that you're servicing that you need to look at because it's not making enough margin for you, you can start to leverage these reports. And for anyone who's not used to this section, these reports can be run manually from here. So I can view a report, either utilizing my parameters here and tell it what date range to look at. I can also select specific customers, zones, freight items, or even exclude one. So there's just 2 or 3 customers I don't need to know about. I also have the option to automate these as well. So what we could do is set up an email that goes out to our directors, just sending this through. We can then just also tell the system when we want to run it, whether it's the second day of every month. It could be every Monday at 9 a.m. We can set these up to trigger via email. So we receive them, we don't have to jump in and produce them manually. Simply it turns up in our inbox. We know we need to have a look, take any actions off the back of that. So from a basic estimate perspective, that's how you can get your line haul and your delivery and pickup costs working from the rate cards. Anyone who's used rate cards before, it is quite a straightforward process once you have the hang of it. If you're new to Transvirtual or new to the finance area, I would recommend having a look at some of our previous webinars. We have run through the rate card setup before, which goes through those service levels, freight items and zones in a little bit more detail. You can also leverage our knowledge base there just to get a bit more of a feel for it. So we've run through the basic estimate costs. What we can do though is provide some better costings for your line haul legs, particularly when we take into account the fact that whether or not a truck is full, it may still cost us a minimum amount of money to get it from A to B. So if we're going from Sydney to Perth and we've loaded one bit of freight, that's still going to cost us a few $1,000s compared to a truck being full. So we have another method where you can utilize agent profiles and agent rate cards to assign a linked consignment manifest consignment to a driver, and then make sure those costs are accurately reflected across those consignments as well. So to do so, the first thing we want to do is jump into Transvirtual, and we're going to set up our rate card here. So again, going through my supplier or my agent rate cards, I can create a new rate. I've created an agent called line haul. This could also be your genuine agents as well if you outsource your line haul to agents. If you're using internal staff and you've got a team member who's doing that run, you can actually create them with an agent profile, so you can still assign the freight to them and get this same level of costing. Or you may have a generic agent profile that's used here. So in our previous rate card setup, we were using line haul costing based off our pricing zones because we needed to take into account our sender and receiver zone. However, using this new method where we've got a linked consignment tying back to a line haul manifest, we're actually able to utilize our head ports, or for anyone who's utilizing an agent or a scan list, you can actually link that to that list as well. What that means is when you create that linked consignment, it's typically going from your sending head port through to your receiving head port, and you can therefore set up your pricing based on those line haul legs. So that's a big difference where it makes it a little bit easier and a lot more easier to maintain, is being able to use those zone listings there. So I'm going to utilize my head ports for this. And we will just enable it as well. Jump in. So when we talk about setting up the service level for this, because we're going to be utilizing a linked line haul consignment, what we want to set up is a service level called line haul. And I've set one up already before, just calling it line haul. You just want to name it exactly that. Don't vary it. For anyone who doesn't know how to set up your service levels, just go to configuration, select service levels, and you can add in your line haul service level like that. All you need to do is get the name, make sure it is exactly line haul, no different spelling or any additional characters in there. You can also hide that from your customers as well, so there's no confusion on their part as well. So coming back now, we can add our freight items. Simply put, we don't need to include all of our freight items here. We just need one. I've created a freight item called full truckload just to make it easy. And when I create that, when I click the drop down, I can just set this as the default freight. So effectively, this will just always assign when we've got the service level line haul for this agent. So it's a catch-all. We don't need to go and add additional freight items below. We simply can set this up. And then last thing I want to do is just pick my zones. So first thing we'll talk about is leaving Sydney. And I'm going to talk about my run to Perth. So I go direct to Perth, say for example here. Now for this line haul costing, what we want to do is set a flat rate. So we're saying whenever we're going from Sydney to Perth, it always costs us a flat rate to get that truck from A to B. So I can assign that cost, basic flat rate, let's say $2,500. I can update that. As we did before, we can copy that across to other destinations as well. So set it up. Now it may vary, and we might say, well, Brisbane's only 1,000, Melbourne's 1,500. And again, we don't need to line haul to Sydney, so that's okay. We can remove that. And to Yennora, based in Sydney, I can ignore those two. So I've just got my 3 values there. Now we've got them. Just to be safe, I can even remove these from the list, so I just see exactly what I need. And then what we can do is basically just save that. Now, if we do need to take into account other line haul legs as well, so maybe from Brisbane to Melbourne, Brisbane to Darwin, anything like that, we can continue to build out that line haul list. But effectively, we just want to save that, and we're now good to go. So coming back, what I want to do is make sure that this is assigned to the correct agent here. So we can see that if we click our drop down, we can assign that to multiple agents if we need to as well. So if you're utilizing multiple agents, you don't need to set up a rate card for each individual. You can effectively add them to this card and make sure that when we've got that service level of line haul, we're assigning that costing. So perfect. Just jumping through. What we're going to do now is just talk through the process of creating that link consignment. Now you've got 2 options here. Option 1 is if you want to make sure that every time you create a line haul manifest, that the system creates a linked consignment. We can search, and just a quick tip for anyone who's used to using our system, if you're going through our global setup or our configuration, if you're looking for something specifically, using a browser search function is a really quick way to find any settings you want. So you can see I've pressed Control F here, and now I can just search through and find the appropriate setting. So I've come down, and this just lives in the long list of other. It's about halfway down, but I want to find the auto link line haul manifest to consignment, and I can enable that. So if you want to have a refresh, you can always just click the little help icon next to any setting and get a feel for it. But effectively what we're doing is anytime we create a line haul manifest, the system will automatically generate a linked consignment, which reflects all of the consignments that are part of that line haul manifest. What this lets us do is assign that consignment to an agent. They can mark it as delivered from their side when they reach their destination, being a depot. Those consignments that sit within that line haul manifest then can continue to be scanned as depot in, loaded on board for delivery. But for our agent, they're able to sign off on their component of the work. They can receive a signature confirming the line haul's been received. They can get paid. And importantly for us as well, we can track those costs because now we're able to assign that consignment to that agent. So if I didn't want to enable that automatically, what I could do is also set up a linked consignment manually through the line haul controller here. So you can see here, I've got my line haul routes. What I can do though is go into my manifest, and we'll show you one I've created already. If I go into a line haul manifest, I can see that all consignments linked, and you'll notice down the bottom here, I've just got to create linked consignment. So what this will do is if I didn't have my global setting on, I could basically choose to create this linked consignment whenever necessary, and then assign that to the relevant agent. In terms of assigning a linked consignment to an agent, you've got 2 options. 1, you can manually assign it from the consignment itself. The easiest way to do this is to jump into your line haul consignment, go to your history, and then from here you can manually assign that to an agent. Now, alternatively, if you've got a set of rules where this regularly occurs, this can be done automatically as well, so you can set up some auto assignment if you need. Normally speaking though, this is typically done manually. It's nice and easy, you can assign it. And then what this lets us do is then attribute those agent costs to the line haul manifest. And what will happen is that flat rate of $2,000 will be divided out against every consignment linked to that manifest. And so if I've got 4 consignments linked to the manifest, that $2,000 is spread across those 4 consignments. So when we go back to talking about the concept of, in a bad practice, a half-empty truck, we still know that those consignments, even though by weight, they may cost us only $10 to get across the country, because they're going on an empty truck, they're effectively costing us $40 or $500 to get across the country. So that way, it just gives you a little bit more accuracy. What it lets you do is, if you're utilizing this method, you can leave out your line haul rate card. You still could assign your delivery and pickup costs from your rate card section in the global setup, but you may utilize this more heavily, this more accurate method of tracking a line haul cost through the system. So everyone, we've gone through a couple of different methods for tracking your costs here. I appreciate I've probably gone through a little bit quickly here, but what I want to do is give you a feel for it. If you are interested in learning more, it's definitely something we can talk to you about. For those who subscribe to a support package, you do have the option to lock in some training with the team. So you can schedule a 15 or a 30-minute call with the team. You can work with them to do a configuration like this. For anyone who does belong to our signature package or our executive package, there's also the option to go a little bit more granular on the line haul costing, that second one we went through. You can start to tie in vehicle types as well. So if you've got different types of vehicles doing line haul routes for you, and they all have different costs associated with them, you can also get quite granular. It does require a lot of configuration. In my experience, it's probably best to set up with your simple estimated cost first, explore the line haul detailed costing, and then maybe once you feel comfortable, start to explore that per vehicle tracking as well, or vehicle type, I should say. There is a fair bit of configuration. Sometimes it's a lot to chew. Sometimes better start simple and build off a simple basis. The last thing I'll say is that if you utilize our BI reporting database, these fields are great coming through, can start to help you build some great tracking of costs within your BI database as well. If you'd like to explore that as well, if you're not utilizing that database today, let us know. Reach out to support at Transvirtual, can give you some information, give you a feel for it. Just gets you beyond that traditional reporting within Transvirtual, getting away from the PDF and Excel reports, giving you a little bit more control over your data. Anyone using Power BI in your organization, the BI database is a great option to plug in and just start to manipulate data how you need to see it. So lastly, everyone, just a little reminder, I'm sure everyone on this chat already knows, but just a quick refresher on how to get in touch with Transvirtual. Whenever you have a question or you want to raise a configuration request or you're not sure who to speak to, email support@transvirtual.com. The team will always acknowledge your ticket, let you know if they're the ones to help or point you in the right direction. For anyone utilizing the support package, as I said, you've also got the option to book in an appointment. If you'd like to have a quick chat with me around your high-level use of the platform or discuss how you might be able to get a little bit more out of Transvirtual, feel free to reach out to me, will.barclay@transvirtual.com. Happy to have a quick chat. We can talk about what you're trying to achieve and the best way to go through it, whether it's through our support team or whether you guys are looking to arrange something internally and just need a bit of guidance from us. We're always here to help as well. So we're going to leave that there, give everyone a bit of time back in the day. Thank you everyone for joining. We will circulate a recording of this as well as any additional help articles that can assist you with this, as well as a link to our old rate card webinar for anyone who would like to learn a bit more from that, start from the very beginning. But please reach out to any questions and have a great afternoon. Thanks everyone.